to the Business Blueprint Podcast, where we take you on an exciting adventure through our triumphs and challenges and failures in creating and maintaining a thriving 6, 7, and 8-figure business. Get ready to dive into our strategies, decisions, and yes, even valuable lessons we've learned from our missteps. But that's not all. We'll also bring you industry-leading guests who will provide you with their priceless insights and wisdom. Stay tuned because the captivating journey of the Business Blueprint begins right now.
It's really based upon each department and really digging into when do we need to hire. And Charles, you mentioned it before, is what market are you hiring in? Because you may have this great formula that identifies the need to hire, but maybe you're in a challenging market. So you want to dial that back and look a little bit more ahead and be proactive. And so that's when maybe you want to spend a little bit more money to get that going. But marketing and recruiting should always work in tandem together. And we really wanted to know, okay, if we're spending X dollars on the marketing side, how much of that is going to be allocated to recruiting? How much of that is going to be allocated to actually spending to bring in the clients? Because without the employee, we may not be able to support the client. So as an organization, we have to look really into the budget part of it and say, okay, we have a marketing budget. So now how much of this do we want to allocate to recruiting? Because that's going to get us to where we want to be from a revenue standpoint. And sometimes maybe it's reallocation of funds based upon the rapid growth of the company. And if you are growing rapidly, then maybe you reallocate some of that marketing funds to recruiting to get that person in the seat so you can continue to provide that excellent service that you as an organization should really, quite honestly, pride yourself on.
And that comes to strategic calendar, right? You know when you need to hire somebody. And like you said, Dan, if you're in a hard market to hire in, you back it up and you say, okay, if I need to hire somebody in April, I need to post the job in December for me to realistically have them on board. Having the plan is great. And it's great when you're growing, you can kind of identify the need. But what about natural employee attrition? How do you handle that, Rebecca?
Yeah, there's no good answer, I don't think. You have to expect a certain amount of turnover. You want to be open and honest with every single person that comes in the organization that at some point we may decide to part ways for whatever reason, right? And it doesn't need to be a difficult thing. It doesn't need to be contentious. It doesn't need to be a problem. Just so long as you're open and you communicate with us about what's going on. And so we've had some employees part with us on fabulous terms, and, we still talk to them and, hey, what's going on? What are you up to these days? And we have that collegial relationship. And, one prior employee actually still refers us employees as well. And they're able to say, yeah, I worked there. It was great. And, I'm still able to talk to them and this is what's going on. We've had other people that didn't take us up on that offer, right? And they just decided to make it a little bit more of a problem. But at the end of the day, we still wish them the best. We hope they're finding what they're looking for. The position just wasn't what they expected for some reason. And hopefully they're able to get wherever it is that they want to go. But being really upfront with, if you come to us and say, look, this isn't a fit for me. Okay, well, is there somewhere else within our organization that would be a fit? Is there a way to make the position that you're in a better fit? What is it that's really working against you, or what is it that's really causing a problem? And if there's no way around it, then okay, we may need to part ways, but let's make this a seamless transition, or as seamless as we possibly can. Give us as much notice as you possibly can. And that way we can make sure it's smooth for everybody. And so you have some that believe you and you have some that don't, and you have to just sort of deal with the fallout as it comes. But we're very fortunate that we do have a good number of ex-employees out there that still we're on great terms with. Maybe they were just moving away. Maybe they just wanted to do something different. Okay, not a problem. Give us as much notice as you can and we'll work with you and make it as easy as we can.
Absolutely. And it's those little connections that you don't realize how valuable they become, because, one of the practices is, when appropriate, I will send an ex-employee a thank you card and say, hey, thank you for all the work that you did. It was wonderful getting to work with you. I understand that, you're transferring to a different market that we're not in, and there's nothing we can do about that. And before you know it, somebody will be like, oh yeah, so-and-so told me I should apply here. And now just that little thank you, not being, oh, well, you shouldn't be moving. This is the best job you'll ever have in your life. You can't control that you move. And some people, like you said, we're on great terms with a couple of people that just, they had to leave. They had to go try to start their own business or, whatever that they wanted to do. And that's fine. And, that person has referred us. And not only they refer us business, each time they know that somebody new starts here, they're all over social media being like, great job to have. It's wonderful that you get to work there. So they're not only telling the local community, they're telling everybody. And it's those little, that is literally a no cost thing to be nice. It costs you nothing. And this is directly from my mother. It costs you nothing to be nice. So, and that always comes back to haunt me. Dan, how do you envision if you say, look, I need to onboard 10 people in the next 3 months? What do you do to get started in that process of recruitment? Or do you ever stop recruiting?
I don't think you stop recruiting in the sense to where you always want to keep your eyes and ears open, right? If there's that A player that we always talk about, that talent, if we can make it work, we want to bring them on because I really don't want to miss out on someone that'd be just a great fit for the organization, which would be a good fit culturally, but which would also allow us to continue to zealously represent and provide great service to clients. 10 people, as you mentioned, to onboard. It's really just taking that step back and figuring out, okay, are these people hired? And if they're not hired, all right, so what do I need to do to get these individuals hired? What roles are these individuals for? And what resources do I have available to me to start really aggressively, actively recruiting? Because it really depends upon why do I need to, I would look at why do I need 10 people by this date? What is my goal that I'm trying to get to? And then I'll identify with the positions that I need. Maybe it's not 10. Maybe I can hire half of those and still accomplish the goal. Or maybe I can bifurcate some of that in the sense to where I onboard X number by this date and then X number by another date, but I'm still within my goal of trying to get to where I need to be. And then it's making sure that I have the resources internally to help me recruit. And that's just not posting on job boards. That's not just doing the active recruiting or the passive recruiting. That's when we have the candidates, make sure we have the bandwidth to do the phone screens, making sure we do the interviews, making sure that if we have candidates we like, let's not sit and wait. Let's talk to them again if we need to conduct a second interview, or if there's questions that we want to provide to them, or if there's any type of personality test that we want to take, have them take so we can get a better idea of would they fit within the organization and just kind of fast track, especially in today's day and age. One of the many things I should say that I have learned from COVID, and especially as we're in this post-COVID era, that you need to act quick because good talent isn't going to be out there that long. And I can just tell you just from hard lessons learned that you have a good candidate and then the next day they're gone. And it's like, well, what the heck happened? So it hasn't even been 24 hours. So there are some instances where you may have to take that leap of faith, but I caution doing that because you really, you don't want to get away from your values and your principles. And sometimes you may lose on a candidate, but bigger picture, if you can stick to hiring by your values and your principles, long term, it will work out. There are going to be some pains involved in that, but it's just making sure that we can identify how we're going to onboard these candidates, what's that bandwidth going to look like, and making sure we have a robust plan in place that can accommodate so we're not taken away from other services or clients that we need to make sure that we are providing the service to.
And you bring up a good point. Post COVID is treating your potential employees the same way that you would treat your potential clients, right? You don't sit there and make your clients wait for a phone call unreasonably, right? Like, well, our policy is that we wait 2 weeks after the first interview before we call you back. And then from there, we wait 2 more weeks. And we think that we're so great that even if you've accepted another job, you will now walk away from that job because we're better. It's acknowledging this two-way respect. And Rebecca, what have you done to, I don't want to say change your hiring processes, but to grow your hiring processes so it does meet the needs of also the potential employees?
Right. So one of the first conversations we have is, what is your timeline? Is this something where you're looking to find a position in the next week? Is it something where you have 6 months? What does your time frame look like? and making sure that we're working as best we can within that time frame. Of course, if they say I need a job by tomorrow, we probably can't, get that figured out. But if it's something more urgent versus if it's something more long term, we want to be flexible. We want to say, okay, well, this is what we're looking for. How can we sort of bring our two needs together? So if they have a 6 month time window and we say we really need somebody within 3 months, we want to make sure we're getting on the same page in terms of the timeline right at the beginning of the conversation, and then working with each other to figure out how we can best accommodate, in both directions. We never want to if we've got a great candidate and we're like, we're going to need somebody in 3 months, okay, we'll hire them now. We can definitely adjust as we need to, depending on what it is, what the need is, what the candidate is like. But we want to make sure that we're working as best we can within timeframes that kind of work on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up a good point. I mean, we just hired somebody the other day that was a little bit above the position that we were looking for. But that individual came in, blew us away, was up here when we were really recruiting for down there. And, we had recruited that individual somewhat and found them in 2 weeks, or it was less than 2 weeks, where we identified the need for a position and said, ooh, we actually found a greater person by putting effort into the recruitment. As we continue to grow, one of the things that we see, and I had a friend that went through this. I had a friend that he's a CFO, and leaving a company, he had to meet with an employment lawyer to make sure his non-compete clause wasn't going to be a problem for the new employer. Dan, how do you handle non-compete clauses, and are they still as positively viewed by the courts as they used to?
Always in the legal field, right? It depends. So the trend, well, I'll back up. For lawyers, unenforceable.
Yeah.
And in a lot of other professions, unenforceable as well, because it really restricts the trade.
Hmm.
But I would say, in my experience and just reading recent NLRB, National Labor Relations Board opinions, it is trending to be more employee favored, in the sense that they're not really upholding a lot of these restrictive covenants or restrictive agreements. But from an employer standpoint, we want to make sure that if an employee does have a non-compete or any type of other clause in there, non-disparagement or not able to really recruit, some people call it poaching, that we're abiding by that. Because the last thing that we want as employers, if we're put on notice and we actively recruit this person after we know that they have this type of non-compete or any type of restricted covenant, that we're not then liable potentially on the other side for a tort, which would be interference of a business relationship, to where the other company could come in and say, you actively recruit this employee knowing that they had this restrictive agreement or covenant. You hired them anyway, and it hurt my business by X, Y, and Z. And so it's just making sure that you're doing your due diligence and knowing if there are any type of restrictions in hiring someone, that you're talking it through, not just with them, but hiring outside counsel to kind of advise you. I don't do employment law. I know of employment law and the questions that I need to ask, but I'm not just going to rely on my own intuition. I'm going to hire outside counsel to advise, is this something that we can do? And depending upon what comes up from that conversation, sometimes you may have to pass on a good candidate, or sometimes you can be open with the other side, meaning the employer, and advise them, and they may say, that's fine, we'll go ahead and waive that. But a lot of these agreements that are out there are just so burdensome and so restrictive that the courts aren't really finding them favorable to the employer, and they're really finding in favor of the employee.
Yeah, and one of the things that we will have a podcast about being smart enough to ask professionals to help you and not thinking that you know everything, is looking to an employment attorney, right? If you have these questions, don't sit back and read something and say, well, I've seen something like this before and the old company didn't sue on it, so this company won't sue on it either. Hire the employment attorney, pay the relatively small fee compared to getting sued, to have it reviewed and have a professional opinion saying, look, this is no good, or this is good. So I think, that would segue into another podcast that we'll have, is about getting the right professionals in the right, seats to advise you appropriately through this process. Rebecca, when you are thinking about recruiting and going out into each business, how much does your reputation? Sometimes unhappy people leave and they talk bad about you. What do you do in that instance?
Not much. You let them be, you let them live their life, and then you let all the other people who like you talk about how much they like you, right? It's kind of like dealing with your 1-star reviews. You can't, if you get on there and attack them, it only makes you look worse, even though you may have every counterpoint in the world to whatever it is they're saying. If you get on there and go after them, it just reflects poorly on you. And so, we try to be positive with everybody, say, I'm so sorry you feel this way. We want to do better. Thank you for your feedback. And then you move on to your next 5-star client, right? And I think you have to do the same with someone who's just incredibly unhappy. It's just, we wish you the best. I hope you find what you're looking for and have a good time. I can't get drawn down into whatever this back and forth is going to be, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be fruitful for either side.
And, Dan, I'll ask you this kind of an obscure question. Do you think it would even be possible to grow quickly if you only employed passive recruiting?
It would depend. There's that answer, right? It depends. It depends on the type of business you are. But I would say big picture, if you're just wanting, well, I'll answer it this way. It depends on what your definition of growth and scaling is. But if you're really wanting to kind of double in size or double in revenue and just continue on fast pace, fast path growth, then the passive recruiting waiting. It's just like waiting for clients to come in. You're not going to grow if you're just, hang your shingle out there, whether it's medical or legal or whatever the case is, or you open up a store and you put your name out there and you're just going to wait for clients. That just doesn't make sense. It's not practical. It's not feasible. So if you're wanting to grow and you're wanting to grow smart, then you're going to want to do more than just the passive recruiting. You're going to want to do the active recruiting that we've been talking about in the prior podcast and in this one too.
And sticking with you, Dan, is there a point that you have where you say, you know what, it's time to bring in an in-house recruiter?
Yes, it would. It's once I identify the position and doing the analysis, I will give myself a timeline. And if we're in a situation where it's not urgent, where it's a growth position and our employees aren't overutilized, then I'll just do that active and the passive, right? The passive posting in certain areas, but then doing the active recruiting. But if it's something where I'm going to need someone by a certain date, whether it's because I have an employee going out for whatever reason, or there's certain targets that I need to hit and I need to be at a certain revenue goal or a client goal by a determined date, then I'll give myself a reasonable amount of time, but enough time to where if I can't meet that by our own internal efforts, our own active recruiting, then I'll seek out a recruiter. And then that leads in just a whole host of questions as far as, well, what type of recruiter do you need to get? And how do you know if that person has your best interest? And then how do you deal with their fees? Because each recruiter structures them a lot different. It's not just always a flat fee. And so that you just, again, going back to all of our discussions, which is doing your due diligence.
Absolutely. And I think what I like best about this series of podcasts is the discussion on, if you want great people, you're going to have to put the effort to go find them. While you may offer the best job in the world, how are they going to know that when your A players aren't looking? So if you really want those A players, you got to go out there and work just like you're working to get your A clients. So I want to thank both y'all for taking the time to join me on the Business Blueprint so that we can continue to talk about how to grow the business, what mistakes we've made, what successes we've had, and what we can do next to continue our growth. If you are interested, please subscribe. And if you have any comments, leave them in the comments below, and we'll try to answer them. And join us weekly as we continue to talk about our growth and our mistakes and some things we even do right. So thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this insightful and entertaining, be sure to hit subscribe below and join us on social media to get more insight into what we are going through each and every day.